Here is the final page of that agreement discussed in Part 1, Volume 67, Number 181, directly from the registry. It was signed by my great-grandfather William George Good and my great-grandmother Ines Lilius Bateman Good. This agreement is one of 6 that Bathurst Lumber Company had with 6 groups of families along the Nipisiguit River. This one included our neighboring Good, Branch, Glendenning, and Connolly families. It was registered January 14, 1921. The women's dower rights were even protected by them being interviewed separate from their husbands by the Justice of the Peace. Ines Good, wife of said William Good, being by me examined, separate and apart from her husband, acknowledged that she executed the said indenture freely and voluntarily and without any fear, threat, or compulsion. On August 18, 1920, as per the agreement, my great-grandfather received $250 for the property rights and privileges of Bathurst Lumber Company coming on the property and $100 for the damage they did to his trees on that 35-foot strip. Plus he got to keep that lumber that they cut and, per this memorandum of agreement, will always, quote, receive all lumber growing on the said 35 feet without being charged by the said company, unquote. So even though the company is doing the work of cutting down the trees, they will not charge us for it. They abide by this agreement for the next 90 years, first by paying compensation to my great-grandfather William George, then to my grandfather Orrin, then my father, per the original agreement. Well, actually, they sent the checks in my mother's name, as she handled the family finances. We've come a long way since 1920. This continued up until they removed the power lines in 2010. Here are the documents on Service New Brunswick's website as their chain of title to the Powerline Corridor through our and our immediate neighbors' properties. Our Bathurst Lumber Company agreement is the number 181, registered January 14, 1921. All that is correct, but it refers to the agreement I just read excerpts from. They do not reference any of us selling land to Bathurst Lumber Company. Service New Brunswick also lists the other 5 deeds of family group deed agreements with Bathurst Lumber Company, including Frank Branch's 1924 deed. Even though they all aren't part of this section shown in green, they list them all together as if they create some sort of chain. They also list all of these exact same deeds for all the other sections of the power line, including ours, though we are not part of any other sections of power line. I will show you who some of these other deeds belong to, but first I want to point out 2 things. Number 1, notice that familiar survey number 2400-7180 done on June 19, 2007. That is also the survey number associated with our riverfronts. Second, I want you to look at the related PID 2020-7692 that is listed as parent of this section. In order to subdivide property, it has to stem from an original or parent property. This PID happens to belong to a descendant of one of those families on the original agreement 181, whose power line and riverfront were taken out of their names in 2007, and they were never notified either. Not that it matters, just like when I pointed out to Service New Brunswick that our property was parent to the riverfront property, they simply removed the designation from their website. So they can just as easily simply remove the designation from the rest of the subdivided properties now, since it already served its purpose. They already had the properties subdivided and transferred. Even if they do try to delete these connections now, I have copies of all the parent-infant designations Service New Brunswick created in 2007 anyway. Here is who some of these other Bathurst Lumber Company agreements belong to. 181 is my family's group, previously mentioned, made the 26th day of July, 1920. 5 of these 6 agreements were made on this date. Registered January 14, 1921. 179, Book 67, page 309, is Samuel and Isabella Branch, Doucetts, Willie Gray Jr., Daly's, William Gray Sr. and wife, Jarvis Black and Catherine, Hugh Black and Martha, more Blacks and Doucets abatement, etc. Also registered January 1921. 425, Book 66, page 778, made July 26, 1920, but registered October 19, 1920, is William H. Hussey, Flannery, Moores, the Coles, Sam and Isabella Branch again, Anne and Margaret Glendenning, more Husseys, Henry and Hannah Melanson, W.J. and Martha Good, and E.W. and Lydia Branch. I take it these are properties closer to town because of Charlie Cole's Turn, Flannery's Hill, and George Glendenning's Crown Grant Lot number 12. Now, 171, Book 74, page 297, registered November 12, 1924, is the agreement exclusively between Bathurst Lumber Company and Frank R. Branch and Agnes for their 35-foot strip of land. It's the same as the other agreements. They get to grow their crops and get compensated to full maturity of crops if damaged by power line work. There is something unique about what Service New Brunswick is doing with this Frank Branch deed, though. They are using that single deed to claim old Seaboard Railway easements. More on that later. Well, actually, let's get into that right now. Volume 74, 171, page 297, is the first one listed on all the other power line sections, but the only one listed for the right-of-way sections way up Pabineau Road, nowhere near the power line corridor. This is Frank and Agnes Branch's agreement with Bathurst Lumber Company. Here's a screenshot from their website listing all the power line sections Service New Brunswick is saying New Brunswick Power now owns because of this one deed. This map portion is showing just one of 12 sections, but it's listing groups of easements from town all the way to the mine. Some sections that are already taken using Bathurst Lumber Company agreements, like my family's power line section, 2080, 52, 55, I circled here in red. They are also listed as part of Frank Branch's deed. Now, Frank and Agnes's agreement is with Bathurst Lumber Company for their 35-foot strip of land. Most of these PIDs are on land they never owned and are actually easements for the Seaboard Railway Company, having nothing to do with Bathurst Lumber Company. Again, many of these PIDs are on the section of Old Railway, as stated even by Service New Brunswick themselves on their info box, Old Railway. That easement shows it running from the reserve to the mine. In light blue, it's hard to see. But Service New Brunswick only made new PIDs for the sections that crossed private-owned lands and transferred them to New Brunswick Power in 2007, and based them on the Bathurst Lumber Company agreements, not the Seaboard Railway. Now, from the 1920s agreement till present, all of us had the right to grow crops, passage, our woodlands, riparian propriety, as well as our heirs and assigns forever, and to get paid any damage that Bathurst Lumber Company and eventually New Brunswick Power, as their successor, causes. We had been paying the taxes on the entire lot, including both the 35-foot strip of land and our riverfronts, in our case since 1879 until 2007. Our taxes only changed literally by a few dollars when Service New Brunswick took it out of our names and assigned it a new tax ID, so it wasn't even noticeable on our taxes. Plus, they included the new PID, in case we did notice, as infant on our tax receipts, so it looked like it was still in our name. Next, Service New Brunswick is claiming on their website that in 2000, the Powerline Corridor sees a name change or amalgamation, August 28, 2000, document 1130-6975. Before I show you this document, take note of that comment. Added PID 2084-2944 as per research on August 16, 2011, circled in green. All document 1130-6975 is an amalgamation of Smurfit-Stone's assets in 2000. Service New Brunswick doesn't even link this document to our Powerline Corridor in its database until 2007. It's a document unrelated to our old easements. The only interest Smurfit has in our easements at this time is what is allowed in the deed agreements with Bathurst Lumber Company. which is to do work on the power lines. The terms of the agreement do not change. They don't get better or worse just because the company changes hands, as demonstrated when Stone Container had acquired the company and its interest from Consolidated Bathurst in 1989, and at least 8 years after that, it was still abiding by the 1920 agreement by paying compensation to my family in that receipt I showed earlier. In 2007, Service New Brunswick will use this document as meaning that whatever interest Smurfit has in our property, formerly Stone Container, will get transferred to New Brunswick Power as real property. It's pretty creative, but again, if you actually read this agreement, it makes no reference to our riverfront or Powerline Corridor. They are using that same document of amalgamation from 2000 in 2007 to combine 170 properties that include our Powerline easements and the Seaboard Railway easements. Okay, remember when I said take note of added PID 2084-2944 as per research on August 16, 2011. Why is it added to the data of document 1130-6975, the amalgamation of Smurfit Stone? If the connection they're trying to make to Smurfit is the interest of our Powerline corridors, PID 2080-5255, which is based on Bathurst Lumber Company agreements, why would they be adding a riverfront property that they are using 1880s fishing privilege agreements from Grant Lot 14 to remove the land from the owner's name? What supposed research is he using? But even after 2011, as per his research to take this particular riverfront out of landowners' names and without notifying them, these same Service New Brunswick subscribed lawyers and surveyors are hired by the very people along the river trying to find out how their riverfronts were removed, and they are never given any of this information by these people who are the ones creating it.